All right, welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of the Life Less Perfect podcast. Today, I am once again excited to talk to my guest, Dr. Robert Dickson. Dr. Bob, more affectionately known as, was born in Alberta. He has a degree in physical education, kinesiology, a certification in paramedics from SAIT in Calgary, and an MD from University of Calgary, and residency certification in family practice. Dr. Bob is the past president of Change for Children and Tools for Peace, the past chair of the board of directors of Arusha Cross-Cultural Center, and was a senior partner with Results Canada. Dr. Dickson has co-led the anti-fluoridation program in Calgary from 1999, which resulted in water fluoridation being halted in 2011. He founded Safe Water Calgary in 2017. He is also the chair of Fluoride-Free Canada. Welcome, Dr. Bob Dickson, a local, retired now MD from Calgary, Alberta. Dr. Bob, say hi to our audience.
Hola, buenos dias de Mexico. I am retired as of, February 18th. I guess that's a couple of weeks ago. And I'm in beautiful downtown or close to downtown San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, which is up in the highlands, kind of northwest of Mexico City at 6,300 feet. So I'm at twice the elevation of Calgary.
Wow, and Calgary's pretty up there already, but that's amazing. So, well, no wonder you're kicking their butts at pickleball, right?
I have to dial back the power in pickleball because the balls fly a lot farther and faster.
Good to know. I'm just learning myself, Dr. Bob. So this will be my first time, as we were discussing before we hit record. I'm heading south myself, April, into Mexico, and I've not played outside before. What's the difference? You got to let me in on the secret.
Oh yeah, it's quite a different game outside. Obviously, inside there's no wind and there's a lot fewer variables.
Yeah.
Lighting's consistent. So the pickleball is light and it does fly different ways in the wind for sure. It's just nicer to be outside though in the bright sunshine. Like playing here by noon, it's getting pretty much too hot to play. So we try to play about 8:39 in the morning and play for a couple, 3 hours. And by that time, you're dragging yourself off the court and pretty hot and sweaty and burnt. It's just great sport. And it's so much fun to be out there. And like I just look out the new courts I'm playing at now in San Miguel, they kind of overlook a bit of the city. And so just to look out there and see the jacaranda trees popping into bloom and just out there blue sky and hitting a pickleball around and laughing and jumping and having fun with friends. It's a hard game to beat.
It's a good day when you can do that, my friend. It's a good day. But you're saying you're not missing the lovely brown we have here in Calgary this time of year.
Really.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm happy you can do that. So, Dr. Bob, we were talking a little bit before we hit record just about your journey. And on the Life Less Perfect podcast here, it's really about how at certain times of our lives we may find ourselves wondering, am I in the right place? Or maybe you're feeling unsure or down about life and where you're at. And if I understand, that was a while back, but a part of your journey in terms of what led you into the art of practicing medicine. And so if you can maybe share a little bit of that and your journey and sort of what got you into this field.
Yeah, one thing we didn't chat about, which was a pretty major marker in my life, was when my father committed suicide when I was 14 years old, just before my 14th birthday. And so I blew out as a teenager. I just didn't know how to handle it. And there was no help for us in rural Alberta at that time. So I was an alcoholic by the time I was 15. And, it's the old sex, drugs, rock and roll and car crashes and motorcycle crashes and bar fights and all those good things. And that lasted till into the 20s. And I finally decided I better get my brain working again. So went back to the University of Calgary and took what's now called kinesiology. It was physical education back then. And that was perfect for me because I always loved the human body and how it worked. I was fascinated by it. But I didn't like so much calculus and physics and all those things that just didn't seem to relate to our journey in life. I guess it does for some people, but it didn't for me. And that was a pretty nice prep for other things in life. I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a phys ed teacher, but it opened the doors to a lot of things, including paramedics at SAIT. And so getting reasonably good marks in kinesiology and then getting top marks in my 2-year paramedic stint at SAIT was, in combination, allowed me to become an ACLS, an advanced cardiac life support teacher, and then I was teaching doctors and nurses and thought I could do that too. And so I applied while I was in paramedic school and got accepted into medicine as a mature student.
Amazing.
And yeah, and so that in itself was a good journey, having 12 careers before. I think from driving truck and driving cabs to air traffic control and child care counselor. And as my now deceased mother used to say, Robert, you've had a very checkered career. She didn't say that demeaningly, but she was right. It was a pretty checkered career. But it's certainly served me well in medicine and in medical school itself and afterwards in family medicine to just being able to relate to patients. I think maybe a light year or two above what some other people that haven't had those experiences do.
100%. So you were 33, you said, I think, when you landed in med school, correct?
Starting medical school. And one of the reasons, well, USC chose me because there's only 2 medical schools in Canada that would take older people at that age. And that was McMaster's in Ontario, which was a long ways away, and I didn't know anybody there. And Calgary, where I was living. And all the other schools like Edmonton, they just laughed. You're 33, go do something else.
Wow.
But now that those gaps have narrowed, Calgary and McMaster are way out here, and the other schools are way out here. McMaster stayed way out here. Calgary's moved more towards the middle, and the other schools move more towards the middle. So you'll find U of A accepting older students too. A friend of mine is just completing her 4 years up there. She'd be 35 now, I think.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it was a great opportunity for me at the time. And I didn't actually think I'd get in because my younger sister, who was eons smarter than anybody I knew in the world, got into medical school and finished at 23 years old. And I saw how hard she worked and thought all the doctors were like that. But when I discovered they weren't by teaching them ACLS, I thought I can do this too. And so I applied and I was fortunate enough to get in.
Yeah.
And just a quick anecdote, I still wasn't convinced I'd get in, but I jumped through a lot of hoops. I was senior volunteer in different places and I traveled a lot and volunteered and so done some of the other things other than the by the book prerequisites. And when the coordinator of the medical school applications and entries phoned me at home, and she says, Bobby, says, your application's been accepted. And I went, no, you're kidding me. And she says, no, it has all, I have the papers right here on my desk for you to sign. And I said, well, I'll be right over. And so I was about probably 5 kilometers from the medical school. And I was so excited. I ran out the door, didn't change or anything, didn't put a jacket on. I ran out the door, ran right by my car, ran all the way to the medical school and showed up huffing and puffing at her desk and went, really? Where are they? Show me. And I signed them right there. And I was a medical student.
Amazing. What a testament, though, to, really entering a field as a mature adult with passion and excitement. I love that story. I mean, I joke too, I work with clients and I've had a colorful life, shall we say. This is how I got the name of the Life Less Perfect podcast. I haven't always been perfect, far from it. In fact, I call myself dense oftentimes. I think I have to learn. I think I need the brick up the head sometimes. But honestly, I don't know if someone's going to give me advice. I hope they have a little life experience too. Good
It
on
goes a
you.
long ways.
Yeah.
And on
So
on the pickleball courts too, I might add. I was at a tournament just this last weekend at the new club that I just joined, La Capilla. And I played in a couple of different segments or cohorts, but the one that was most fun was playing in the old guys group, and that's a 70 and above. And I played with a 71-year-old from the States who is just a master
nice.
pickleball player. He's so cool. And we won our games like 11-0, 11-1, 11-2.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the day after the tournament, a couple of days after, I guess it was, we played these young kids, and the girl is like 16 years old, and she's really good. And then she's playing with this big, strong Mexican guy that's about 25, and they went, "We'll take on you old guys." And
Yeah, yeah.
well, you better be careful. We got about a century and a half experience here. And they went, "Yeah, yeah, bring it on." And so we beat them 11-1.
I love it.
We just had them running all over the court because we didn't have to
Yeah.
move the scores.
Strategy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Strategy. Yeah.
Wisdom,
Yeah.
wisdom.
Exactly. Embodied knowledge, wisdom.
Yeah.
So exciting. Well, I just can't wait to get down there and start playing. So back to your journey a little bit, Dr. Bob. So I know starting at that age at 33, you're a little more seasoned and had some life experience as mentioned. And I think you said that you were sort of less able to be indoctrinated is the word I
Yes,
think.
that's the term I like to use, indoctrinated, because I think the vast majority of the young people that go in now, and no offense meant, they're mostly really nice kids, but they are really easily indoctrinated by the system, by the folks with the blinders on so tight that they can't see anything on either side of them. They don't want to see anything on either side of them because they're in that spectrum of medicine. Allopathic medicine, as you know, is positioned in the middle, and all the other things on the outside don't work, or they're not legitimate, or you shouldn't even talk about them, like, chiropractors or acupuncture or TCM.
Even
So
functional medicine, I know many physicians, I think it's getting more accepted by mainstream, but still a lot of allopathic physicians view sort of functional medicine as, unscientific, shall we
yeah,
say.
a little bit airy-fairy. If I shared with you my Dr. Bob's 18 protocols for health and wellness and immune system boosting,
No, I would love
um,
that.
I will send them to you after this, and you're welcome to share them to anybody you want. I've shared them with thousands of patients and friends over the last few years. I've actually developed them probably 25 or 30 years ago with just a little list. I'd make like 6 copies on a page and cut them out and give them this little piece of paper instead of a prescription that it just have like 5 things on, take your vitamin C and your apple cider vinegar and your oil of oregano when you get sick kind of thing. And
Amazing.
now it's a full page of Dr. Bob's 18 protocols. And the College of Physicians and Surgeons actually took me to task on that and took me to court on it. And I won last summer. It was over 2 years. And I
Was
was
that
fortunate.
during COVID that they did
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and one of the mistakes, I made 2 mistakes on that page. One is that I put Dr. Bob's protocols for coughs, colds, flus, fevers, and COVIDs. Of course, it's going to get slammed down and shut down right now of physicians and surgeons. And then the other thing I didn't do was put a disclaimer on the bottom. And one of the reasons of that is because they're also taking me to task. I just finished the 6-year court trial for water fluoridation, where I've been a leader in the water fluoridation movement for actually 26 years now. And on that one, I refuse to put a disclaimer on for anything fluoridation because their views are wrong. It's absolutely proven wrong by science. And 95% of the world does not fluoridate their water. And so for them to say that I'm not in the mainstream is totally wrong, that my views are a minor or irrelevant or out in the a lone wolf crying in the wilderness or whatever. So I've never put one on, and I still refuse to this day to put a caveat on anything I do fluoridation. But with my Dr. Bob's 18 tips, I probably should have put that on there. So if I would have left out COVID and put on a disclaimer, they probably wouldn't have taken me to task. They actually had an AHS spy come in and kind of entrap me. And so fortunately, I was covered by the Canadian Medical Protective Association insurance, which is the insurance that all doctors in Canada pay into the group insurance. So
Yeah.
anybody that has any sort of charge against them, whether it's good, bad, or ugly or indifferent, they usually represent most people, most docs.
Yeah.
And they do sue pretty well. So I had good lawyers at Bennett Jones downtown, and we did a lot of research on complementary and alternative medicine. And the college hired an external investigators group of hitmen and women out of Ottawa, former cops and military people, and they investigated me. And I guess I never had any final report from them, but the college came back last August and with an 8-page letter exonerating me and saying, well, you really have some good facts and figures, and we definitely agree with all that you're saying about alternative and complementary medicine. You're resolved from this complaint. And yeah, I was kind of in shock. I had to read it a couple of times. And I said, this is coming from the
Amazing.
physicians and surgeons.
Wow.
I thought maybe this
Something
is
something has changed, a little bit about RFK in the United States, and I'll be curious to know your sort of thoughts on how that might influence and affect us here in Canada. That,
definitely a good topic to talk about. Yeah,
yeah,
good
yeah.
one. So I thought that was maybe a harbinger of things to come, but 2 months later, even a month later, September, the tribunal determined that the complaints review committee within the college determined that I had to go to full tribunal court for my water fluoridation activities, my 6-year case with them for water fluoridation. So that happened the last week of January. So I had to fly home from beautiful Mexico and the best pickleball in the world. This little town I was staying in had 32 dedicated pickleball courts in the town of about 2,000 people.
Wow.
So really was having fun there, but I had to fly back and deal with the College of Physicians and Surgeons and my lawyer legal team. And so that's finally mostly settled. And if you want some of the particulars of that, I don't mind sharing it now that it's kind of going public.
Well, I would love for you to just maybe expound for a minute about, how we're in the year 2025 and our illustrious mayor Gondek has decided that it's time to bring fluoride back into our water system. Like, what the hell is going on? Why are we so in the dark ages up here? Wait, like what?
Yeah. Well, we've had, what's this? That was our seventh plebiscite in 2021. The first four plebiscites in Calgary in the 60s and 70s defeated water fluoridation. Then my ex-friend, Dr. David Swan, decided that we should have it back in. And so in 1989, he campaigned along with all the big names, the big corporations, medical entities to put it back in. It took him 2 years to build the fluoridation injection facilities because it's so highly toxic. I don't know if you know what your readers know that what's injected into our waters after we clean them with a 4 or 5 stage process, then we inject hydrofluorosilicic acid as the last thing before it comes out to your home. And that comes out of the fertilizer industry stacks in Florida. So it's an industrial waste product called hydrofluorosilicic acid that's not allowed into the air, into the ground, into the rivers, lakes, streams, oceans, anywhere by strict law. It can't be put in any of those because it's so toxic. But they figured out a way to convince doctors and dentists that fluoride is good for, especially for the poor kids. Like I'm all over for helping the poor. I've been doing it for 40 years or longer. But this harms the poor kids. It doesn't help them. It harms their brains, knocks their IQ down. So that's what we're putting in our public waters, hydrofluorosilicic acid, HFSA.
A
And it's
neurotoxin, essentially.
neurotoxin. It's a brain damager, yeah. And a thyroid damager. We were talking before about thyroids, and it's a thyroid damager, thyroid hormone disruptor. It's very bad on kidneys. It's hard on bones, makes them thicker but more brittle and easier to fracture. Actually makes the teeth harder and more brittle and easier to fracture too in the long term. So yeah, Gondek, before she became mayor, Dr. Craig Young, who's one of the top, most scientific dentists in Canada, he's so knowledgeable. He's way more knowledgeable than any doctor about fluoridation. And we went to Gondek. We met with her a couple of times when she was a counselor, and I gave her a bunch of science. And she said, "I love science. Bring on, bring me some more science." And then she gets elected as mayor, and she goes, "Fluoridation, best thing in the world. Let's push this through." And they pushed it through without even any more expert consults. And it was a new council in 2021. We lost the fluoridation plebiscite, which medicine should never be done by plebiscite. You shouldn't be telling your neighbor what dose or what medicine they should be taking. And I shouldn't be telling anybody unless they come to see me as a doctor. So we shouldn't be telling other people what to take for medicines. And that's what a plebiscite does. But anyway, we lost it 62 to 34%. We lost it 62 to 38. We lost it resoundingly. And then the new council, they wanted to, show the public they weren't as bad as the last council. So they wanted to have something that they could be cohesive about. So they chose fluoride while they were pressured by some of the pro-fluoride activists to have fluoridation. Water fluoridation is the first thing in their first council meeting in November of 2021. And so they voted. They said, no, we don't need any more information. We know enough. Well, those 8 new councillors knew nothing about water fluoridation or about the new science that was coming out. And so they voted 13-2 to restart water fluoridation. And Gondek was at the lead of that because she was the new mayor. And she was, just raw fluoridation.
Has to wonder what incentivized her. I don't know. Like, it's just odd to me. So where are you at with that in terms of that fight now? Was the plan? I think this summer they wanted to reintroduce it, correct? Or
Well, Waterworks was given in 2022 $10 million to have it done in 2023. 2023, Waterworks came back to the city and said, oh, supply chain and infrastructure, we're just having a struggle here. We need an extra $18 million. Well, council didn't even hear about that. Administration just wrote it out of their slush fund, $18 million check, says, here you go. And Waterworks says, oh, thank you. We'll have this done by early 2024. And of course, early 2024, a year ago, they came back and said, yeah, infrastructure and blah, blah, blah. And so they said, well, we'll have it done by Q1 of 2025, which is right now, it's the end of Q1. January, February, March 2025. And it's not in yet. And we just heard through the grapevine that credible sources actually that it's not going to be till at least mid-April. So it gives us a few more weeks to campaign. And so that's what we're doing right now is really campaigning strong and hard. Hopefully you've looked at our petition on safewatercalgary.com and signed that. It's an excellent petition. Excellent.
Forward it around to everyone that I know.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. And hopefully Eva's done that too. I should do something with her. But anyway, lots of people online are doing it. Sean Newman is spreading the word, and Sheldon is, Yak and Chuck, and people like that. They have pretty big groups following them. They're spreading it around. So we're just getting more and more people. We're over 6,000 people signing the petition now. And we just delivered just last week really good packages, like 5 days ago, actually registered mail packages to every single councillor and to the mayor and to David Duckworth, who's the CAO, the Chief Administration Officer of all of Calgary, the City of Calgary. He's like the boss of Calgary, really. He's the one that signed that $18 million paycheck for waterworks. So we delivered a package to him, and then one to Danielle Smith, and then one to the Minister of the Environment, Rebecca Schultz, and one to Adriana LaGrange, the Minister of Health. So like Adriana LaGrange cannot stop water fluoridation, doesn't have the power, but she could stand up and tell Alberta Health Services to take it off their website that they support it. And then Premier Danielle Smith doesn't really have the power to end it, but Rebecca Schultz does, because the city has to get approval to take out fluoridation when we got it turned off in 2011.
Yeah.
And then they have to get approval from the Ministry of the Environment to put it back on, turn it back on. So Rebecca Schultz and her department could stand up and say, look, we just got some new information that's really powerful and we're damaging kids' brains. So what we're asking for is a moratorium.
Yeah.
So we're not, stop water fluoridation forever, or this is the most evil thing on the planet, which it's one of the most evil. But we're just saying, just put a moratorium on, just put a little halt on it here, folks, and let's have a look from all the scientists on both sides, not all the scientists on one side. Let's look at the science on both sides. And let's maybe debate this a bit and look at all the new studies that have come out, particularly the last 10 years. A lot of them out of Canadian cities at Canadian fluoridated levels of 0.7 parts per million. So let's have a look at those. But right now, City Council, most of them are just not willing to even have a look. Fluoridation, no. If you're against fluoridation, Dr. Bob, they tell me, he says there's an election coming up in October.
Well, here's hoping that you have success with that. But if we don't, what can our listeners do? Now, fluoride is not easy to remove once it's in there. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. So first of all, I say, I don't even have a water system in my home myself. I just have a little thing that goes in the bottom of the fridge, a little filter, and it doesn't filter out fluoride. So when I get back in April from Mexico, I'm going to have to buy some sort of water system. So the best thing for your listeners to do is, and you can write this down if you like, or I'll email it to you, send it to you, truth about fluoride. It's just one word, no spaces. It's not the, it's just truth.com. And it's Casey Kroll, who's an engineer out of Ontario, and he's done all the work for me. Like I bought him a bunch of copies because he says, buy me a copy if you like my website. Well, I bought him a bunch of copies because he saved me so much work. He's gone through toothpaste. He's gone through the 40 teas that are available, and teas really concentrate fluoride. He's gone through toothpaste. He's gone through the fridge filters. He's gone through the pitcher filters. He's gone through the on-the-counter filters. He's gone through the whole house reverse osmosis filters, lots of them, studied them all, tested them, and then puts out his recommendations. So it's a really good website, truthaboutfluoride.com. So if you have anybody that's wondering, what should I do? Either talk to your neighbor who's got a really good system from a local Calgary operator, or go on Truth About Fluoride, or I'd recommend do both, actually.
Yeah. So I know, I think reverse osmosis can get it out, but then you're removing all the kind of the good stuff out of your water. But I think the Berkey filters, were effective. Am I wrong?
Yeah, they got in some trouble though, because they were claiming removal of fluoridation or fluoride for like a year or something. Berkey's with their extra fluoride filter are pretty good for probably a few weeks or maybe a handful of months at the most. Then you got to change out your fluoride filter. And Santevia is pretty good. I think they might have a similar problem though.
Yeah.
So Berkey and Santevia would be the two better ones that I know for on the shelf, on the counter. You got to be a little careful with the under-the-counter ones, because some of them don't pressurize, and so any bacteria in there will kind of just sink to the bottom, and you just keep filling up from the top, and then you just get the top water out, and so the bacteria can grow in there. You can end up having worse water than when you started. So make sure you got a pressurized system if you get an under-the-sink one. Yeah, reverse osmosis removes all your minerals, everything, strips everything out. So they do have the cartridges, but they're probably pretty cheap minerals. So if you're gonna get reverse osmosis, you probably don't need their cartridge. Just buy some good minerals from a reputable health food store, good vitamins, and take those on a daily basis. So yeah, there's ways around it, but the easiest way is if you have fluoridation in your city or town, you just tell the administrators to go like this. They just go and turn off the fluoride tap, and it's gone in a day or two. And it's a lot better for your pipes too. Fluoride is so corrosive for our pipes. We had this big blowout in Calgary, as you know, last year. Well, that wasn't fluoride, or was it? We had fluoride until 2011. It probably
Exactly. You have to wonder how much that might have contributed. And we're having more. You've been away, Dr. Bob. There's been reports, we've had multiple blowouts here very recently. So it just keeps happening. So yeah, something was going on to corrode those pipes to that degree.
Yeah,
Certainly.
so fluoride wasn't the total cause of it, but it's a contributor.
Yeah.
And the bigger causes, like under the roadways, with salt that they put onto de-ice, and then it leaches down and starts to break down the infrastructure and the outer structure of pipes. So, but fluoride leaches like solder, and leaches lead out of solder. Yeah, it's just not good for piping systems as a whole.
Yeah. So Dr. Bob, I want to touch on the RFK thing in the States, but I want to I know my listeners probably in particular would be interested, as am I. It's just sort of the culture of this. To me, it almost seems almost like a religion in a way of this sort of science. And I know on your email you have a quote that I really, really like by Dr. Marcia, is it Angel?
It's Marcy Angel.
Marcy Angel. And the quote is, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine."
Yeah, strong quote. And she
Gosh.
wrote the book, The Truth About Drug Companies, in about 2005, and that's a powerful book.
Hmm.
Took it to my sister, who was a psychiatrist, and she was the vice president of research for Eli Lilly, one of the biggest drug companies in the world. So she didn't care much for that book.
No doubt. How are
And
you two at the dinner table, by the way?
that didn't do a lot for our relationship.
No.
No, unfortunately, yeah, she passed 5 years ago this month, actually. Yeah, she passed just the day they announced COVID. She didn't pass up COVID. She
Yeah.
passed something different, but
Yes.
yeah, very sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, the drug companies have just they've lorded it over us for so long. It's been an incredible journey.
And, I'm curious because as Canadians, I think we think, oh, that just happens in the States. We're not as affected here in Canada. And I know that physicians, and you can speak into this, obviously, are not incentivized like they are in the US. I mean, yeah, but you're still sort of captured in terms of your recommendations. Would that be fair?
That's totally fair. Did you watch what was the series on Netflix last year? Was it Painkiller? That four-part Netflix series?
Oh,
Did you watch that?
yes, that was
Oh,
that was sickening.
painful. Yeah. And I was a totally, as far as I could ever be, totally moral and ethical doctor. I did see some drug reps. I'd be respectful to them. I'd sometimes try out their brand new shiny products, but not until I tried out all the other things before. And then if they had something that was really good and sounded proven and based in science, yeah, they're always more expensive. But if these things didn't work and this thing was going to be better and maybe the same price, I'd try them. So I was not an early adopter by any means of new drugs, but I was not one of these people that slammed the door in drug reps' faces neither. And to watch Painkiller, I was caught up in that just like virtually every doc, or 99% of doctors in North America, and that whole opiate thing, because Purdue marketed MS Contin so well. And most of us docs, like we struggled with pain with patients. It's hard to control pain. And to get something to control pain that wouldn't get addicted on, or maybe just short-term opiates and get them off as quick as you can and get them onto non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that weren't going to kill them like Vioxx did. And, it was quite a struggle for us. And so when these pretty little girls would come dancing in with their short skirts and with this paper from the New England Journal of Medicine saying, look at the bottom line here, doc, less than 1% addictive with our OxyContin. And we go, really? And so we try it out, and then we go, yeah, but then maybe next week they need a higher dose, and the next month they need a higher dose yet. And pretty soon these people would be so addicted. And so I know I didn't prescribe it for very long, but I was caught up in all that stuff that happened. The movie was absolutely real. That four-part series on Netflix, so well done.
Yeah. That was just shocking and heartbreaking to watch. And, the ending of that, where the lawyer really sort of thought she had them by the short and curly, so to speak. And, it just takes that phone call to someone that higher up, was just so, like, it just made me sick to my stomach, because I feel like sometimes that's just what we're up against. And then again, we go back to RFK, it's what he's been up against all these years. And I don't think people really who just maybe follow legacy or mainstream media, especially in Canada, we don't really have much of an alternative here, sort of understand. Like I know my parents, I've tried to talk to them a little bit about RFK and why I like him and what he's doing. And of course, he's just been painted as this horrible person. So maybe you can help some of our listeners, if they're, most of my listeners would not necessarily be mainstream media people, but just to help people understand that. And I have a heart for physicians at the same time, because it's not like I think you're sitting around, twiddling your mustache and thinking evilly, and nor do I think are many of these people involved. It's just sort of something that's happened that, like, this is where we're at. It's where we've arrived.
We've been ingrained, as I'm sure you know, Sean, in chemicalized medicine since, well, before 1910. But 1910 to me was the sort of watershed year and mark that chemicalized medicine really came into vogue with John Rockefeller. And he just set out to chemicalize medicine and make it petroleum based. And that was it. And all the other alternatives, all the other modalities on the side, all the other complementary medicines were crap, were not working, didn't have any place in our world. All we could have in our world, all we had room for, was chemicalized medicine. And they've done such a good job over that over the last century and a bit. And that's where we are right now. We're totally chemicalized medicine that's totally captured all the alphabet organizations in the United States. And everything flows out of the United States into Europe, into Canada. I call them the SOBs, the south of borders. The south of borders control a lot, those SOBs. And so they're alphabet organizations. So we can look at the CDC, the HHS, the NIH, the EPA, on and on and on. They're all captured. The FDA totally captured. And then you go into the non-governmental organizations like the WHO and Gavi, and they're all captured too, because Bill Gates and Soros and all the big funders are just they're funding 60, 80, 90% of these organizations. And so if Big Pharma is pouring billions of dollars in all the rest of the advertising and whatever companies out there combined into lobbying, then they have control of the Senate and of the House down in the States. I mean, that's the way the system works, unfortunately. So the parliamentary processes are captured, all the alphabet organizations are captured by the money from above, power and control. And there we have it, folks. You want to tell somebody that autism is caused by a vaccine? Well, you get blown out of the water so fast. Ask Dr. Andrew Wakefield. He's put out a couple movies now, a recent one. His story is so sad. This guy is one of the best docs that probably has ever walked the planet. And he's been vilified, smacked, banged, whacked, deplatformed, delicensed. It's not a doctor anymore. They just call him Andrew Wakefield. It's not called Dr. Andrew Wakefield because he doesn't have a license anymore. And did it destroy his life? I wouldn't say destroy. Did it change his life and his career markedly? Absolutely. But he's developed a good life and a whole new set of colleagues and friends and influential people around him. And he's done a lot of good work in the world since he's been a gastroenterologist, who suggested that maybe there might be, from our findings in the autistic kids we're working with, there might be a correlation between MMR vaccines and autism. Well, let's whack all the 12 people that were running that study, including Dr. Andrew Wakefield. And then, well, let's see, 10 of them, let's let 10 of them go. They would just exonerate them, let 10 of them go. And we'll just do Brian, whatever, and Dr. Wakefield, we'll pursue them. And then there's Brian, or whatever his name was, and he managed to sign some deals and got out of it. So that left Dr. Andrew Wakefield standing alone. And he wouldn't acquiesce, he wouldn't give up, he wouldn't sign anything because he said, I didn't do anything wrong. All I said was, let's look at it, folks. And now you're taking me down. And so that's the short version of the story there.
And if I understand his research correctly, and I mean, I looked into this a lot because, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, my daughter was vaccine injured. And so he was basically just alluding to the fact that some kids, because of their gut biome, would be more susceptible to these injuries, which now, I mean, oh my God, the gut-brain connection and all of the new science around the microbiome, I mean, it's just a mountain of evidence. And so I think he's soon to be exonerated or proven probably.
I don't think he'll ever be exonerated in Britain. I'd be very surprised. But then people didn't think the wall was coming down in Berlin either.
Sure.
And, sitting on my meditation cushion in the Baja in January, I just had this huge feeling that something was happening. And then it went, aha, that's it. The wall is coming down. The wall is coming down. That's what's happened with, well, Trump. I'm not the biggest fan of Trump, I must say, but I think he's learned some lessons and he's got good people around him this time instead of either poor people or people like RFK that he hired in 2016 and booted out in 2017. He's got good people. I think he's going to keep around him this time and actually do some real progressive change.
I don't know if you saw the recent Joe Rogan episode with Elon Musk on there talking about how they've discovered the nest where the vampires are sleeping.
Mhm.
It's such a great allegory. I loved it. So yeah, it's some good theater for us right now, for sure. Lots going on in the world regarding this. So do you think if RFK is successful in the short time span that he has, I'm not sure what he can get done there in 4 years, but how do you think that will affect us here in Canada and sort of the trickle down?
Well, good question. He's the head of HHS, which is the most powerful organization down there. So he's the head of the EPA, the FDA, the AH,
Yeah.
yeah, he's the head of, he's in charge of all of them. It's a
Yeah.
multi-trillion dollar
Yeah.
portfolio that he has. So just like the docks all around the world that have been taken down for this sort of thing, it doesn't take very long for that to ripple out. If I get fined a bunch of money for speaking out about fluoridation and get charged about it with a bunch of things, or if my dear friend Dr. Mark Trozzi in Ontario gets taken down by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario in an over 2 year kangaroo court case where he presents experts that are the best in their field. The college goes up one side and down the other of them, and then kicks them out and says, no, they can't be on your team. They can't testify for you. And then they find him guilty, even though he's got mounds of evidence and the Crown has this much evidence. And then they find him guilty, rip his license away, and fine him an additional $120,000 after he's already paid like probably $300,000 for his lawyer teams. And so it doesn't take very many people like that. Dr. Patrick Phillips, Dr. Chris Shoemaker, the woman in Toronto whose name I can't remember, Mark. You get a few people like that out there that have just been ravaged by the college physically, mentally, morally, ethically, and financially. And am I going to speak out? Ooh, look what happened to those guys. Yeah, I know there's something going on wrong there, but maybe I'll just be quiet or maybe do like your pediatrician friend did and just said behind closed doors or whatever. But they're not going to speak out publicly because it's just too dangerous, too volatile, career destroying. In the States, that's a good point because Mark Trozzi is going to be working, I think, a bit with the Maha team in the States with Kennedy. And he said, I can't do anything in Ontario anymore. They just are so blinded and so belligerent and they won't listen. They're just Orwellian. They're just stuck in their ways. But he says what happens in the States flows into Canada, using the water analogy.
Fingers crossed that we do have some trickle down effect. And I think it's so hard to, like again, people of my parents' age, right? So they have this utmost faith in government and think these government regulatory bodies are doing their jobs and they're protecting us. And they can't believe that they have been captured. And it's really sad. And I think in Canada, that's like I said, if you're sort of watching mainstream legacy media, that's what you're still going to believe as well.
You're still going to hear it to this day. You're not going to hear
Yeah.
anything from it to this day
Yeah.
for the most part. I mean, it's starting to come out a bit. The Overton window is starting to shift a little bit. As I posted on my Facebook page the other day, here's the latest score, folks. Conspiracy theorists, 37. Trust the experts and trust the science, 0.
And conspiracy theorist was a term, honestly, wasn't it invented by the FBI to just sort of paint people who were critical thinkers in a certain light, honestly?
It was the CIA,
Or
actually.
the
Yeah.
CIA, sorry.
There's 18 major organizations in the United States that do intelligence, and the
Right,
CIA and FBI are just two of them.
right.
NSA, the NSA, CIA, and FBI are the most powerful.
Yeah. And I've still yet to read RFK's book about the real Anthony Fauci. Have you read that one yet?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you want to read that. I haven't got past chapter 2. It makes me so angry and so sad. And I got to admit, grown men can cry. I cry too when I read that. It's just incredibly heartbreaking sad. And it's truth. I mean, RFK doesn't bullshit about a lot of things.
Oh,
He documents, he researches, he knows
yeah.
what he's talking about. But the story about how he got into vaccines?
I don't know that I do. Didn't he feel like how he ended up with this situation with his?
It might have had something to do with his
Yeah.
voice, with his dystonia. But mainly it was because he was having so much success as a lawyer in the environmental movements. Like he cleaned up the Hudson River in
Yeah.
the States, just dead. He
No.
fought so many major organizations and corporations in court and won a lot of those battles. And so this group of women were always following him around and they had vaccine injured kids. And they would follow him around, and afterwards they'd wait in line to talk to him. They'd say, would you mind, you're doing such a good job in environment. Would you mind looking at vaccines? He goes, oh no, vaccines, they're probably safe and effective, and I don't have the time. And finally, one woman camped on his doorstep and with big boxes of studies, and she comes over and he goes, what are you doing here? And she says, I'm not leaving until you read these studies. And
Wow.
should I call the police? No, she says, you should read these studies. So he says, okay, I'll read them. And that was the end for him. He was just sold after that. He saw the damage, the harms, the injuries, the buried science, the collusion, the propaganda, the fear. He saw it all. And so that was about, I don't know, maybe 18 years ago. I've been a big fan of his for
Me
a
too.
couple. Yeah.
It's my daughter, as I mentioned, that's what got me down the rabbit hole when my daughter was injured at 18 months. And so that's the thing. You don't know until you know, right? You're just,
How's your daughter doing now?
she's doing very well, of course, because, you know, that situation and my own situation with my own health is what led me into studying nutrition and studying functional medicine and nutrigenomics and clinical methylation and all of the things. Like, it's dug me down so many rabbit holes. So no, she's doing very well. She's a beautiful, fully functioning, independent adult.
Oh, cool. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, and I think she was less affected than some. And certainly, if I wouldn't have done what I did do in sort of taking care of her and trying to reverse some of that situation holistically, who knows how she might have ended up.
Probably not as good as she is now. I'd pretty much guarantee that.
Yeah. So I don't
But
know if many people know. Yeah, the whole MAHA movement was started by mothers. Mothers who, again, you have the situation where you see it in front of your own eyes. You know that this is what happened to your child and the gaslighting and all of that that happens. And like I said, you used to be able to do more comprehensive searching on some of these sort of outlying studies that were there. They've just been completely buried or censored now.
platformed.
So yeah, different times now. So interesting time to be alive, and we'll await to see what happens. I don't know, Dr. Bob, I could just probably talk to you for hours and hours.
Oh,
um,
likewise, because we're on a very similar path, actually.
yeah,
I'm really
absolutely.
happy to hear how deeply you've delved into this. And,
Mm.
people like you know more than probably 95% of doctors do about vaccines and vaccine injury and about alternative medicine and about things that actually work rather than just putting a Band-Aid on things like we tend to do for the large part of medicine. Allopathic medicine is really good at emergency medicine and at
Easy.
urgent care and mediocre at kind of family care, but really poor at chronic care. And that's where the vast majority of people end up is in chronic disease, as Dr. Casey Means out of Stanford outlines so well. 50% of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic, 50% of Americans are overweight. Actually, it's more like 75% of Americans are overweight, 50% or 40% are obese. And yeah, you go through all the diseases, the chronic diseases, and America is just getting slammed. So if RFK and the group doesn't turn that around really quickly, they're going down, down, down really fast. But if he makes some heads roll in those alphabet organizations and in the bigs, they can turn around the food industry, partially at least, and they can wake people up. And that's what we need right now is we need a total awakening and a change in guard of our medical system, our educational system, right across the board. We need some major changes.
I would agree. And if we can do anything, first of all, we can vote with our dollars, right? So, I mean, I know it's so expensive to feed our families nowadays, but you can look to groups like the Environmental Working Group to sort of know where to optimize or maximize your organic spend, as a for instance. So we can vote with the dollars, we can vote, in our elections, but just become informed. Like, don't just rely on the news to tell you what to think, you know. I mean,
This trust the experts and trust the science has to go. I mean, science is about looking into things. It's about delving into issues. It's about listening to all sides. It's about gathering more facts and more information and constantly questioning. It's not about, I am the science, and if you don't trust me, you're anti-science. I mean, that doesn't work.
um,
If you have the courage, read that book on Anthony Fauci and tell me what the last few chapters say, because I'm not.
I'll do a report and send it.
I don't know if you recommend books to like bibliotherapy, I think is really a good way to go with patients and clients.
Yeah.
Do you recommend books like Vaxxed, Unvaxxed that we came out just last year with Dr. Brian Hooker and RFK? That's
Yeah.
a really good book. I think Probably the number one book, though, for people to get that are kind of on the fence or unsure or uncertain or want to know more would be Suzanne Humphreys, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys' first book called Dissolving Illusions.
Mm.
Dissolving Illusions is from, I think, 2013. She's a medical specialist, I think nephrologist, if I'm not mistaken. But she took 2 years off to study just polio. And, I know if I go downtown right now with the microphone in Calgary, or if you do, maybe we should do independent studies where each interview 100 people and see what the results are. And ask them, what do you think of the polio vaccine? I bet we both get the similar result. One might be 98% and the other be 99%. Oh, it's the best thing that ever happened.
Yep.
Saved millions of lives. Well, polio vaccine hardly saved any lives and caused tons of cancer. But it was, before COVID, it was one of the biggest frauds and scams that's ever been propagated in the medical community. Well, in the world, it went outside the medical community. It was so well done. It was so well orchestrated with propaganda and fear that virtually every citizen was touched by it. And to this day, every citizen, well, yeah, but I had an uncle that had polio. Well, no, he didn't have polio. He probably had one of the things in the polio basket that had wild polio, transverse myelitis, aseptic meningitis, Guillain-Barré's, et cetera. And then as soon as the vaccines came out, they took all those things out of the polio basket and went, whoo, polio went right down. And say, look how well those vaccines are working. Well, it didn't work at all. They caused more problems than they ever could solve or help.
And polio is one of the attenuated vaccines. Is that correct or no?
You should read Suzanne Humphreys' book.
Right.
It delves into it a lot further. But they had attenuated. They first had live virus, and then they had attenuated virus, and then they had acellular and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, yeah, it was just all a manufactured scam, unfortunately. And then the other book that I've read that's really good too, that was published, now it actually wasn't published till 2022. So it was published in the middle of COVID, but it was written in 2019. So it was actually finished before COVID came along, but they decided since all this stuff was happening in COVID, they better get it published really quick. And so they got it published in 2022 called Turtles All the Way Down.
Mm.
Turtles All the Way Down. And they named it that, and they did not put their names on the book. They did it anonymously because they knew that they and their families would be in grave danger from this multi-trillion-dollar industry. And so Turtles All the Way Down, the subtitle is Vaccine, Science, and Myth. And it's the most researched book I've ever seen in the last 40 years of being in the medical system on vaccines.
Wow. So they come with receipts also. Yeah.
Well, there's 500 pages of quite readable text, actually, fairly large print and readable for lay or medical people. And then they attached to it, they didn't want to have a book that was this thick, so they attached to it on the QR code about 350 or 400 pages of scientific links and evidence and documents and data.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's a really good book. It has over 80 pages on polio. And you begin to understand that nobody understands what polio is, except that wild polio virus is virtually gone from the world. And yet we vaccinate billions of dollars a year, vaccinate our young kids like 4, 5, 6 times before they get to school with polio virus. And and it's gone. Wild polio virus is gone. The only thing that's in the world now is vaccine-induced polio.
Yeah, exactly.
Vaccine injured or vaccine induced polio. And that's worse than any polio. And polio itself wasn't that infectious. You could have a household full of people and only be one person that was affected by it. And that happened to be the person who was out working in the fields and in the orchards and picking all the fruits and vegetables that would have been sprayed with DDT and lead and other sorts of things. They'd come home and nobody else in the family would get it. So yeah, it was pretty highly infectious. It was dangerous. You better vaccinate everybody in the world for that.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
So, my daughter asked me the other day, because I know that, she's a typical young woman and she doesn't believe everything that comes out of her mother's mouth, even though this is her story, part of her story. She said, but Mom,
Right.
what about are some vaccines good? And I said, absolutely, there's no question. So what would you tell young families now, maybe wondering what to do? And you can tell me if I'm misled. What I said was, well, first of all, I think I would wait till they were 2 years old, till their immune systems developed. And then I might try and hopefully RFK does some work in sort of fixing some of the adjuvants, I think, that are difficult. But I think the future of medicine is also understanding genetics and the role that plays, how some people might be more susceptible to injury, like methylation issues, things like that. So maybe know your kid's genetics, or your own at the very least, and think about that. Were they born prematurely? Were they breastfed? Do they have a healthy microbiome? All of that kind of stuff. And I said, and if you can get maybe one at a time and spread them out.
Like some of the European countries. Yeah,
Yeah.
some of the backed up and they don't start vaccinations till the kids are 2 or 3 years old. And then they don't give 6 in one day or
Exactly.
three at a time or whatever. So that is one way of doing it. You probably know the work of Dr. Paul Thomas out of Oregon.
I've heard of
No?
him.
Oh, you should definitely check him out. Dr. Paul Thomas. He's a pediatrician, and he had a major paper that was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and 7 days later it was ripped down, and he was fined, and his license was taken away. He had thousands of patients, and he documented them all in his practice because a large number of them, and he kind of got the reputation of accepting unvaccinated patients. So I'm not sure the exact percentages, but he had vaccinated, he had unvaccinated patients, lots of them, both sides. And he documented them all over the years in a couple of 3 decades. And he found, like, if you put office visits on this axis and you put diseases on this axis, the office visits from the vaccinated kids were like this, and the unvaccinated kids were like this, or sometimes like this. But there's a couple of orders of magnitude difference between the vaccinated kids and the unvaccinated kids, having way fewer office visits, way fewer antibiotics, way fewer interventions of any kind. And then he puts autism on the scale. And out of the thousands of patients he had over the years, he didn't have a single one that ever had autism in the unvaccinated. In
Wow.
the vaccinated, it was still like this.
Yeah.
But not a single one had autism in the unvaccinated. Hundreds, maybe, well, it'd be a few thousands, a couple thousands of kids.
Yeah. Very telling. Just like in the Amish community, apparently
Yeah.
there's no.
So there's Dr. Paul Thomas's, there's the Amish community, there's a group out of Chicago. And so now, if you look at Brian Hooker and RFK's book, they document over 100 studies that have been done painfully or secretly or surreptitiously without much funding, but they still took the chance and did them because they saw a need. And now there's over 100 studies that are not funded by the CDC or the FDA or the NIH. Some of them are starting to be funded by the NIH now.
Yeah.
Progressive people there. But anyway, yeah, read some books. So read Susanna Humphrey's book, Dissolving Illusions. She came up with kind of a workbook or a company book, either 2023 or 2024. But just read that first one from 2013. Frickin' amazing.
Mm.
And it's not that long a read. And then Vaxxed, Unvaxxed, and then Turtles all the way down if you really want to get into the science of it.
Yeah. And I love him or hate him. Like I said, politics aside, I'm not a huge Trump fan either, but I know that he signed an order to not allow the schools to make these vaccines mandatory in order for your kids to attend school, which I don't know if that'll ever happen here.
I'm not sure how far that's going in the States. Has that actually been passed and been?
Well, he just, it was one of his executive orders that he signed, right.
He's been taken to court for a number of things that he's doing too. So that might be one he's taken to court on.
Yeah.
But I mean, that for sure, that should be a no-brainer. Because if you look at, say, the measles outbreaks that they've documented there's that one in California a few years ago, and then the one in Oregon and the southern end of Washington State. Well, those two, 90 whatever percent of the kids were vaccinated. Like 95% were vaccinated, and they were getting measles. And then they blamed it on the unvaxxed. Well, geez, you guys. And then I think the same thing's happening in Texas, and that outbreak that's been happening in Texas the last month or so. They spin it out. They actually manufacture it. Those two have been proven in California and in Oregon to be manufactured events.
I don't doubt that at all. I don't.
Yeah.
Because they're very much under the looking glass right now, and they're threatened.
It's the old guard going down, the
Yeah.
new guard coming up, and you get in that turmoil in the middle, which Jim Kinney, the American, wrote a book about 20 some years ago called Sea Change. So we're in that sea change. Old guard going down, new guard coming up. Woo!
Yeah. Yeah.
And what can come out of that? It can go this way or that way or sideways. But I think mostly humanity as a race, I think we're going to interchange somewhat with AI, but hopefully not getting taken over by AI. But we're going to come out a lot better on the other end. We're going to come out more loving, more humanitarian, just as a better race than we are right now.
Well, I sure hope so, Dr. Bob. I mean, that's what I always encourage my listeners. I like to be a place where we can come together and talk about what makes us more alike as human beings and not what separates us. So we may have many differing views on this, and I think it's just certainly a level of knowledge. If you've only ever just heard one side, then that's all you really know. If you're going to properly debate anything, you have to study both, right? So I would just offer if we can just have compassion and hold each other as we go through these changes, because change isn't easy, as you well know. Yeah. It has been my absolute pleasure getting to know you and chatting with you. As I mentioned, we could probably do this all day. So I'll let you get back to your pickleball and I'll look forward to watching your posts, see how you're doing down there.
And just remember, fluoridation, don't swallow it.
Great, great motto. Awesome. Thanks again, Dr. Bob. Take care.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for having me on, Shauna, and I look forward to future discussions.